Okay, so we're going to continue on with pin escapes, right? So as we talked about before initially, if you classify a pin as wedges supported by body weight, that's preventing you from moving, the best way to defeat this system, it seems really straightforward, right? Just get inside the wedges and move the body weight. As we talked about before, sometimes you're gonna have to move the body weight a little bit to get inside those wedges. But once you get one wedge in, or inside on one of the wedge, it becomes easier to move the body weight. So it's not gonna be like, I'm inside. It's gonna be like you're gonna fight, get one in, and once you're inside that one, you're gonna be able to move a little bit more, move him a little bit more, get the second one in, get the third one in, and usually, as long as you have more inside of your limbs inside his limbs, you'll eventually be able to regard or kind of escape the pin. And as we talked about before, just to review, there are reversals, probably not very high percentage. Most of it is going to be getting inside and getting back to guard, right? So the nice thing about pin escapes is it goes really well with guard retention because the major movements for pin escapes are going to be your shrimp, your bridge, and your back heist, right? So we went over all that in guard retention as well. The main difference, as I was speaking about before, is just what your aim is when you're doing these motions. So when you're doing, the back heist is pretty similar for both because you're trying to turn from your chest facing up to chest facing down. Back heist is when you're on your back and you're kind of like heisting up to get there, right? So in guard retention, the back heist is going from your back, chest facing up to chest facing down. Very, very similar in pin escapes as well. The shrimp and the bridge are a little bit different, so we'll just talk about that a little bit. So again, as I was telling you guys earlier, most people, when we think of a bridge, like the strong first bridge is, good, and you're driving straight up, feet parallel, because you're trying to, if your goal is to get like maximum extension and hip height, then yes, this is a great bridge. In terms of jiu-jitsu, specifically jiu-jitsu pin escapes, what you're actually trying to do, it doesn't matter how much power you can generate upwards, it's how much rotational torque you can get, and eventually to turn down the side. So a good bridge for gymnastics or whatever might be like this, where your legs are parallel, a lot of driving force up, but actually for jiu-jitsu, you want asymmetrical legs, so one close, one out, so that you don't lose any power in your bridge. So if I wanted to, again, with the goal that I want to turn my chest facing down, if I bridge like this, eventually, like I'll lose kind of steam because my leg base is weak. It's hard to describe, but when you do, it's not a good leg placement for if you want to turn down. Whereas if you have one leg closer and one leg straight out, like asymmetrically, so they're distance away, what happens is your initial leg is going to be your driving leg where you're bridging up, you're getting on your shoulder, and then your knee and your toes are going to touch. And there's going to be a transfer of pressure and weight from this leg to this leg so that you can eventually turn down, right? So a little bit of a different motion versus just, right? Because if I go like this and I want to turn, I'm kind of in my own way. This leg becomes in the way of this turning over. Whereas if you have a straight up here, easy to come down, right? Basically what you're trying to do with the bridge is eventually almost turn 180 around. So if you had a good bridge motion, you're like, you should be facing the same way as what you're going through, right? Another thing about bridging is postural alignment of your head. So if I wanted, again, we're trying to bridge to turn to face the other way, or even just chest facing up. If my head is here and I bridge, eventually your head gets in the way if you just keep looking straight, because your body's turning, and if your head doesn't, you're kind of like this. So a small thing to do is, again, you want to be looking at where you're going. So whereas if I turn this way now and I'm looking up, see how my head kind of tucks in, because I keep my head in alignment with the rest of my spine so I can turn in, right? So a lot of the pin escape stuff are these pretty straightforward motions or movements, but it's just being able to chain them together to get inside of those wedges to break them apart. Make sense? So unfortunately for pin escapes, it's a lot of work. It's just you're gonna have to get pinned and you're gonna find your way through it using the system. So again, our first step is to eliminate vulnerability to being finished or vulnerability to being passed and having people like go from a side control to a mount position. So you don't want it to get any worse. Then when you have your arms once the vulnerability's removed, you're gonna start to try to move his body weight a bit to try to get those limbs inside of his wedges, build until you have majority inside space, and then you should be, sounds easy, right? You should be able to get your guard back.